grow knowing where I've been planted? What do I aim to be knowing where I've come from? And when do my ancestors rise up? When does my history betray me? When does it snap me back and say, you cannot go any further, wherever I'm going or wherever further is? One of the things that has been argued recently is about social mobility, and that people have remained in the same social structures based upon their history. So, for example, the royal family aren't going to be claiming benefits anytime soon, regardless of what happened. Why? Because their history determines their present and equally their trajectory in the future. We speak of, Prince George. He's just popped out of the poor woman's womb, and all of a sudden he's this. For where he sits when he's playing with kids, that's nothing. But all of a sudden the weight of history will fall upon him. He may not have asked for it, but that's then now determined for him. Someone's written it already. And we may look on envy at those with that historical past, but it's a lot to carry. That's a lot to carry. And in some respects, as a black man within the Church of England and equally being born here, my choice or my relationship with history determines two things. Do I negotiate with it, converse with it, struggle with it? Or do I allow it to hold me back? Or do I build upon it, as I said before, stand on it, and therefore then see a vision of what's possible? And that's not to say that those who come before me have, in a sense, made a path for me, because their intention, I would argue, would be just to survive, just to live the next day. But I can't allow the chains, and the more dangerous chains of the past, which are usually invisible because you can't see them physically, to hold me back into the potential that I can be. So history has a determinant upon us more than ever before. Even just this road here, which you walk down, is called Glebe Street. The word glebe is a word which was used for the land which was assigned to vicars and priests in order that they could live. All this would have been farmland which would have decorated this church. And if I was a priest or a vicar way back then, I would have, in a sense, hired out the land to small landholders in order that they could grow the food on their land. But that word glebe now is, intended to speak of, the pub across the road. Even if you look at the roads that you live down, it has a history. There's a road just over the A500 called Lytton Street, and I remember bearing a woman who was born down there, but you wouldn't see any of the houses that were there anymore. But she was a product of that street. That was her home. That was her history. And particularly when you do funerals, you talk about the past so much. This was here, that was there, and we're like transported back there. But we're not called to remain there. We're called to converse with it. Because, the behaviours and so on and so forth, speaking to our present. But going back on a personal level, like I said, white, black, Asian, all of us, immigrants in the future, and that's a beautiful leveller. But more importantly, we have a history that if we do not negotiate with, it will snap back at us, and it will pop us. It will come back at us, and we think we'll be surprised. But then the question that eternity will ask of us, the question that heaven will ask of us, is why didn't you look back? Why didn't you see what went on before? As I mentioned to maybe two of you before, the month of January is named after the Roman god Janus. And the Roman god had two heads, one which looked to the future and one which looked to the past. And in a sense, there's something really beautiful, if not knowledgeable, about the reason that God came to the fore, because it was about time itself to say that that past is always going to impact what we can carry on doing. And this is one of the reasons, in a sense, because we've not studied the past correctly, we are surprised by the present. We are astounded by what the future may hold. Groups like ISIS or, movements that have come before, like the Black Panthers, or the rise of certain rebellions and so on and so forth, we are shocked. We kind of snapped back, and we are, in a sense, left worried and concerned by what's going on, and we think, oh, we have an idea how to deal with it. But then what's even worse is this. If we look at, say, the Native Americans, for example, they have been shoved into these reservations where present problems like alcohol and drink and joblessness then become the norm. But the problem with the Native Americans is not necessarily their fault, is that they've been shoved into a foreign country. They can no longer negotiate with the past because their geographical points of reference have been decimated. These were nomadic people who would roam, the whole span of North America. Their history is in every footstep that they make, but they can no longer walk that. They can no longer see where their ancestors were. And so therefore, in a sense, they're like an untethered balloon which has been blown away by the wind of modernity, completely, decimated, so unhinged. The Aborigines in Australia, study that. You see, the licentiousness and the crime that has riven and driven those communities. And sometimes the people who have come later on, i.e. the Australian immigrants who were once criminals, look at them and think, oh, they don't know what to do, because somehow this modernity that we claim is potentially the future has never negotiated with the past, so therefore, how can they live in this present? It's impossible. If you don't know who you are, who do you become? And for those people, they're untethered. You imagine if you cut off the history of the royal family, if you then took away the title prince or queen, you're not going to turn around and call her Liz. And even as me saying it sounds disgusting, because we have been kind of nurtured and formed by what she is. So when we look at those particular groups, and even ourselves, this is one of the things that Stoke is dealing with, the kind of schizophrenia of a proud past and a hopeless future. We've got DHL instead of Spode. We've got Screwfix instead of, one of the, what's the big pottery company? So like Wedgwood, for example. Emma Bridgewater is a shining light, and Port Miriam and others. But we feel untethered. And you can say that for a lot of small communities, mining towns up and down the country. Whereas London or cities like Manchester have been able to cover up that kind of dichotomy and craziness by having industries that make more money than sense. They can get away with it in a sense that the borrowed time is even more borrowed. But small towns like this, Derby, Nottingham, what do we do? And even then, that past is only a very short time ago. Going back even further, where we were born out of the farm, where we live by the rhythm of the seasons. When time was dictated by nature, not us dictating nature, but nature dictating to us. All of a sudden, we are unhinged. So there is a potential hope in the future if we're willing to recognise our disconnect from the past and recognise what leaves us afloat, what leaves us flown away. Just a few thoughts there. Yeah. Excellent.
Anything you have to say.
All right, fantastic.
We've only got a 5-minute film. I was just thinking,
I've got all these 3 different films in one film.
yeah, we've got a lot. So.
Yeah, you should expand it a little more if you want to. Yeah, because it was 3 minutes, now it's
5,
5.
okay.
Send Brendan.
Okay. Would you be able to look into the camera and say, what a load of old nonsense, or something along those lines?
Yeah, sure. In what context would that be placed within the film?
There's this different sequence before your bit, and it's basically the bit where it says time's controlling you, and this is when you come in to say, no, that's not true. So that's why I'm saying that's a lot of rubbish.
What a load of rubbish. Yeah.
So something along them lines, it's just going to be the audio of you.
Yeah, no problem at all. So straight at the camera. What a load of nonsense. Brilliant.
Thanks very much.
The past, for me, is vitally important. It informs us, certainly, of where we've been, and it has set a path for us by enabling us to hopefully learn from that which has gone before. Stoke Minster and Stoke itself as a city is littered with the past. I think certainly this building itself reeks of it. Reeks maybe for want of a better word. I'd say drips of the past. As you walk around, you're going to see tiles and monuments which speak of how people were and how they lived, and equally how they wanted to be remembered. How we remember them is entirely up to us, but our impression of them has certainly been shaped by what they think they should have left behind. And history has a very important aspect in our present time, primarily because it tells us of what our behaviour can be and equally what it was. And it's also repetitive and cyclical in its nature as well, which we sometimes forget. Also, we're very much products of the past. For me, on a personal level, I had two parents who came from two very different parts of the world. Those two parts of the world were certainly dominated, if not run, by the empire here. And they saw this country, this nation, as a place which they wanted to call home at some point. So my mother took the trip on a boat from Jamaica, and my father took a trip similarly on a boat from Nigeria. And all the history that we read about has certainly made an impact on my life, hence how I've become a first generation living here, certainly from my family's point of view. Also, if we forget history, if we render it as something which is moribund and useless, it has the manner of being able to snap back at us at times and at places which we feel sometimes inappropriate, but equally quite surprising. We've recently seen the incidents of, say, racism, which have maybe manifested itself in the Paris metro. And we sit complacently thinking it's all gone and done away with. It's something of the past. And I think Rio Ferdinand, before he was commentating on the recent West Ham and Tottenham match, said, well, no, it hasn't gone away. It is still there. There's still things that need to be done. So we forget the past at our peril, forget history at our peril. Equally, I think we should study it more. We should study it more because within it is us. Humanity in its basic traits has not changed. In its basic application of what it hopes to be, it has not sort of, how can I put it, wavered from. And our study of the history, of our history, doesn't necessarily mean we won't repeat it again, but it may give us the tools to recognise what do we do if we do it again. How do we deal with things? How do we tackle things? So history to me is vital. It also speaks of what we can build on. One of the things which we here in Stoke, now I've lived in here having moved from London, we are very much living under the shadow of history. One of the problems that we have in a building like this, particularly when you walk around and you see the monuments to the people of the past, like the Wedgwoods and Spodes and so on and so forth, is that we look lovingly, if not sentimentally, on what took place then. And then ironically, we might sometimes feel the pressure of the presumed greatness of those who walked this fair city many, many years ago. As you may have seen as you've walked around, there are monuments to the past, the pottery history as it was. And people speak of the time when you would leave one job and go into the next one. And it's like a golden era, a golden age whereby which, everything was fine and people just seemed to somehow live this kind of lovely, beautiful life. And in our effort to either replicate that which has gone before, we feel we've not lived up to that of our ancestors. Now, whether they at the time ever thought about us going forward is another matter altogether. But we sometimes feel the weight of that history. I would argue that we don't live under it, we live with it, we live standing on it. And actually standing on history gives us the ability to look at the perspective upon which we stand, to see what is available to us in the future. And I think that's vitally important as well.
Perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for from the past.
Cool.
Shall we move on to the future?
Yeah.
Or the present?
How do you know?
The present, I'm going to have to sit. Sit on it. Sit on the farm. Are you comfortable just looking at the lens?
Yeah, no problem. If I divert my gaze to you, please knock my head back.
That's the future.
That's the future.
Oh, the
Yeah.
present. Oh.
Uh,
You can probably get away with looking at me if you want.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. You're prettier than him, so that's an advantage, you know what I mean? Billy, far away.
What are your opinions on the present?
Interesting. We live in interesting times. We recently talked about history, and I argued how important history was. But we are also, to an extent, disconnected from history. We live in a time where we know more about anybody else and everybody else, have more information than we can begin to even digest. One of the things when my mum would take us to McDonald's is that we would only eat maybe 1 or 2 burgers. Lest we ate any more, we would be overfilled. We would be gluttons in front of her. She certainly wouldn't have allowed that. So just that definition alone is an example of limits. Yet we live in an age where our limits have gone beyond the limits we had. So we have Twitter, Facebook, for example, WhatsApp. We are connected technologically by more things than ever before, but we are separated even more so by that same technology, which we argue brings us together. The present is very interesting. It's a moment of continuous flux. It's a fluidity which we are struggling to contain because partly we are disconnected from our history, so therefore we are quite fearful of our future and we are, in a sense, nervous of our present. But within that is a chance to reassess, to negotiate, to pray, to hope, to be fearful as well, and all the mix in between. It's the time of great conversation. Who are we? What are we? What are we to become? What does the whole world hold for us? And what do we hold for the world? The present allows us to recognize each precious moment. Time has a way, particularly for us in the West, of being planned and managed to the nth degree. We all live by our diaries on our iPhones. If it doesn't flash up and tell us what we're doing, we do not know what to do. I recently was sitting watching TV and there's an advert for a new phone or an app which says, we're going to do this today. And in essence, we have delegated control and choices of our lives to machines. We've recently had the Oscars, whereby which we had Eddie Redmayne, who was lauded for his appearance and his acting in the film The Theory of Everything. And that same man, Stephen Hawking, is arguing against artificial intelligence. So we have to ask ourselves the question, what are we rendering our control over to? Have moments become so planned that they're never anything spontaneous? Have moments, in a sense, been delegated to machines who have a particular purpose to drive us to a particular point? Have we forgotten to live within that which we're given, which is the right now? Or are we so intoxicated by that which we hope to be and hope to do that we no longer, or if anything, forget that which we're experiencing at this moment in time? That's kind of one opinion. I think the present gives us hope, even though we may be driven by fear. And I think it's something we have to be more attentive to. My argument for history still remains. The disconnect is evident. The reason we have museums is so that we can walk back in time. We can allow ourselves in the present to reach back through the window of the past and pluck that which we need from it. A man I had the privilege of saying goodbye to had an amazing phrase. He talked about the past being a library which you walk into and you take what you need for the present and then you place it back. The present is great if we are willing to negotiate, if we're willing to connect, if we're willing to understand our history. And when I mean our history, I do mean our history as human beings, as young people, as individuals, as older people as well. The present offers a lot more than we recognize if we're willing to see the time that surrounds it. Is that okay? Yeah, cool.
Pretty happy that. Leave it to me in life. Let's take a look at the future.
Sounds brilliant.
Okay.
What are your opinions on the future?
The future. I would like to describe the future as the undiscovered country. Undiscovered by us, as well as undiscovered by the powers beyond us. We, if we want to term we, as in, say, priests and people who enter this building, have a religion which, in some ways, gives us an excuse about the future. We would say it's in God's hands or it's in some other deity's hands, and we leave things up to him or to her, however way we feel we describe it. I would say, as much as that may have a truth, it betrays our part in what the future could be. I think the future is built on two things. Number one, what I spoke about before, the history. Equally the present, but also our desire to always seek something new, learning from that which is old and that which is present within us. The future opens up a degree of possibility, but it's also hijacked by our desire to remain the same and also to grip what we think is comfort food, so to speak. My mother passed away recently, you're talking barely 4 or 5 months ago. And that, in a sense, impacts on my relationship with the future. For she, in her present form or in her previous form, is no longer invited to that undiscovered country. She lives in the country that has already been written, the past. And so therefore my relationship with the future is completely changed by that which has happened in the past. And I have a choice. I have a choice in some respects to be either consumed or submerged or drowned by that which has taken place, the pain, the purpose, the poignancy, the awful nature of the loss. I can be submerged in a tsunami of what has taken place. Or, like a surfer, I could ride the wave of emotion and see where that wave takes me and where it lands me. What beach in time will I be placed for that which has gone before? So the future holds a great deal of promise if we are willing to grab hold of it, knowing that we can connect with that before and knowing that we can live within the present moment we have now. We are always fearful of the future. And so therefore, in a sense, I can understand our delegation to machines. Write my future for me. Put something so far ahead in the diary, you hope somehow, it will come about. I was a great fan of a comedy called Seinfeld, and there was this, one of my favourite characters was a guy called George, and he had great trouble dating ladies. So what he would do, in one instance, in one episode, he left his hat at the flat of a lady he had broken up with. The only reason being so that in the future, he could ring her up and say, I left my hat at your place, and somehow have an excuse to go back in there. Because he was so fearful of the future, he thought he would make it for him. You know, he thought he would actually, in a sense, engineer, manufacture the future. The future is where creation takes over. We are crippled as Christians in thinking that God only did his work in 7 days, resting on 1 and doing the rest in 6. Creation continues. Life is still going on. And sometimes, as me as a priest, when I hold a baby at baptism, you look into the eyes of the future itself. You know, what potential seed, what difference will this child make, not just to me right now, but also to the world itself? Can those who have brought the child into the world actually be part of history? Or do we allow history to be dominated by figures who we presume to be greater and larger than us? What is the seed of hope this child may have? What dangers does this child have? You know, all those questions are held within that moment. But it's not questions that are either answered, they're questions that are equally conversed with as we continue to talk. So the future holds a great deal. It's the undiscovered country. It is the unwritten story. But it continues. It continues because the force of life itself demands that it does. We are fearful of the future, so we, in a sense, build a wall of China around ourselves, be it through technology, be it through politics, be it through policy, be it even maybe itself through religion. We invest in a rigidity which dismisses the fluidity of life itself. So the future is there to be walked into with a fear and trembling which, in a sense, determines our limits, but also widens our eyes. With a relationship with the present which acknowledges the moments that we live in and the precious nature of them, with a connection to the past, so that we may not be hijacked by it because we've missed it, but we may learn from it so we can walk fearfully, thoughtfully, with pride and with potential into a future which is that beautiful, unknown and undiscovered country which everybody is invited to. I said at my end of my mum's funeral that she was an immigrant. She was an immigrant because she had decided to leave her land of her birth and build a future, which she didn't know what it was at the time she left, in the UK. But I said to the entire congregation, and the congregation that had gathered there, the 250 people that were there, the white, the black, the young and the old, the male and the female, that all of us are immigrants now in the land without Eunice. The future is where we are all immigrants. It's the level playing field of life itself. Is that okay? Yeah, cool. Blinded. Nice one.
Could we get one last line?
Yeah, sure.